The bullet struck the wooden post beside Helena Vance's head so close she felt splinters pierce her cheek. And in that crystalline moment of terror, she realized this stretch of Colorado wilderness would become her grave unless someone intervened within the next 60 seconds. The year was 1878, and the mining camp she had fled 3 days prior sat 15 miles behind her. But the 5 men who had pursued her since dawn now formed a tightening noose around the rocky outcrop where she had taken refuge. Her horse lay dead 50 yards downslope, shot out from under her during the initial ambush, and her fingers trembled as she gripped the small derringer that held only one remaining bullet. She pressed her back against sun-warmed granite and tried to steady her breathing. The August heat made the air shimmer above the scrub brush and scattered pines, and sweat traced lines through the dust coating her face. Her dark brown hair had come loose from its braid hours ago, hanging in tangled waves past her shoulders. The calico dress she wore was torn at the hem and stained with dirt and blood from a dozen scrapes. She was 22 years old, and she had made the mistake of witnessing something she should never have seen. 3 nights ago, she had been walking back to the boarding house where she worked as a seamstress when she passed the alley behind the Silver Creek Saloon. Through the darkness, she had seen Frank Dalton and his men beating a prospector to death over a disputed claim. They had taken turns with their fists and boots until the man stopped moving, and then Dalton had looked up and locked eyes with her. She had run then, knowing that men like Dalton did not leave witnesses alive. He owned half the businesses in that lawless camp and had the sheriff in his pocket. By morning, she had taken what money she had saved and ridden south toward Westcliff, hoping to lose herself in that larger town where she might find help or at least anonymity. But Dalton had sent his best men after her, and they had been relentless. "Come on out, Miss Vance," a voice called from somewhere below her position. It belonged to Cole Brennan, Dalton's segundo. "Make this easy on yourself. The boss just wants to talk." Helena did not bother responding. They both knew what Dalton wanted, and talking had nothing to do with it. She peered around the edge of the boulder and caught a glimpse of movement through the sage. 2 men were working their way up the eastern slope, while another circled west. Brennan and the 5th man would be coming straight up the middle. She was surrounded, and the sun was climbing toward noon with nothing but open country stretching in every direction. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and the canteen that had been strapped to her saddle was now somewhere with her dead horse. She thought about her mother back in Ohio, who had died when Helena was 16. Her father had remarried within a year, and the new wife had made it clear there was no room for a grown daughter in their house. So Helena had headed west with a wagon train, seeking the independence and opportunity she had heard the frontier offered women willing to work hard. She had found work easily enough, but she had also discovered that the frontier was just as dangerous as it was free. Another shot rang out, and rock dust exploded near her left shoulder. They were closing in, taking their time, making sure she had no avenue of escape. She checked her derringer again, knowing 1 bullet against 5 men was no equation that ended in her favor. Still, she would not make it easy for them. She would take one of them with her if she could. Then she heard something that made her heart leap with desperate hope, the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast from the north. She risked another glance around the boulder and saw a lone rider coming down the ridgeline at a gallop, kicking up a trail of dust. The rider sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dark hat and duster, and even from this distance she could see he was headed straight toward the confrontation. "We got company," someone shouted from below. The rider did not slow down. Instead, he angled directly toward the 2 men on the eastern slope, and Helena saw sunlight flash off metal in his hand. The crack of a rifle split the air, and one of Dalton's men stumbled and fell, clutching his leg. The rider worked the lever action and fired again, this shot kicking up dirt at the feet of the second man, who dove for cover behind a juniper. "Who the hell is that?" Brennan's voice carried an edge of uncertainty now. The rider was closer now, and Helena could make out more details. He was young, probably close to her own age, with a strong jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but his movements were fluid and confident as he guided his horse with his knees while keeping the rifle ready. He wore a faded blue shirt under the duster, and a gun belt sat low on his hips. There was something deliberate about the way he moved, as though he had done this before and knew exactly what he was doing. He reined his horse to a sliding stop 30 yards from Helena's position, placing himself between her and 3 of the 5 men. Then he called out in a voice that carried authority despite his youth. "This does not look like a fair fight to me. 5 against 1. I am guessing the lady did not invite this much attention." "This is none of your concern, stranger," Brennan shouted back. "Ride on and keep your health. I am making it my concern." The stranger worked the rifle lever again, the metallic sound sharp in the hot air. "The way I see it, you fellows have about 10 seconds to mount up and head back where you came from. After that, I start putting holes in people." Helena watched, barely breathing. Who was this man? Why was he risking his life for a complete stranger? She wanted to call out to him, to warn him that these men would kill him without hesitation, but her throat was too dry to produce more than a whisper. "There are 5 of us and 1 of you," Brennan said. "You want to die for some girl you do not even know." The stranger's response was to put a bullet through Brennan's hat, sending it flying off his head. The shot was so precise that Helena knew immediately this was no ordinary cowboy. This man could shoot. 4.5 of you now that I winged your friend down there," the stranger said calmly. "And I am good for at least 3 more before you could reach me. Want to find out which 3? There was a long silence. Helena could practically feel Brennan calculating the odds, weighing his loyalty to Dalton against the very real possibility of dying in this empty stretch of Colorado wilderness. Finally, she heard him curse. "This is not over," Brennan called out. "Dalton will hear about this." "I am sure he will. Tell him Yates Sullivan says hello." The name seemed to mean something to Brennan because his next words came more carefully. "You are Sullivan, the one who cleaned out the Henderson gang up in Wyoming." "I prefer not to dwell on past accomplishments," Yates said. "Now are you leaving, or do I need to make my point more clear?" Helena heard movement below, the sound of men retreating through brush. She kept her derringer ready, not trusting that this was truly over, but after several long minutes the sounds faded into the distance. Yates Sullivan remained mounted, rifle ready, watching until he seemed satisfied they were truly gone. Then he turned his horse and rode up to Helena's position. He dismounted in one smooth motion and approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the prairie. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who spent his life in the saddle. There was a gentleness in his expression that seemed at odds with the deadly precision she had just witnessed. "Are you hurt?" His voice was softer now, concerned. Helena tried to answer but found she was shaking too badly. The adrenaline that had kept her sharp during the siege was draining away, leaving her weak and dizzy. Yates must have seen this because he quickly stepped forward and caught her elbow as her knees buckled. "Easy now," he said, guiding her to sit on a flat rock in the shade. "You are safe. Just breathe." She managed a nod, forcing air into her lungs. Yates pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. She took it with trembling hands and drank deeply, the water like salvation flowing down her parched throat. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." "Happy to help." He crouched down so they were at eye level. "I am Yates Sullivan. Those men mentioned you by name. Want to tell me what this is about?" Helena studied him for a moment, trying to decide how much to trust this stranger. But he had just risked his life for her, and she had little choice but to take a chance. So she told him everything. The murder she had witnessed, Frank Dalton's power in the mining camp, her flight south and the relentless pursuit. Yates listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "I have heard of Dalton," he said when she finished. "He has been operating with impunity for almost 2 years now. The territorial marshal knows about him but does not have the evidence to move against him." "He killed that prospector in cold blood," Helena said. "I saw it. Your word against his, and he owns the local law." Yates rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "But if we could get you to Westcliff and find someone willing to listen, maybe we could change that equation. I know the deputy marshal there, a man named Carson. He is honest, which is rare enough to be remarkable." "We," Helena repeated. "You barely know me. Why would you involve yourself further?" Yates was quiet for a moment, and something flickered in his eyes that she could not quite read. "Let me just say I have my reasons for wanting to see men like Dalton face justice, and I do not much care for the kind of men who hunt women through the wilderness." There was a story there, Helena sensed, some pain or loss that drove him, but she did not press. Instead, she said, "Those men will come back. Brennan said it was not over." "Probably not." Yates straightened and walked to the edge of the outcrop, scanning the surrounding terrain. "We need to get moving. Your horse." "Dead. They shot it out from under me." "Then you will ride with me." "We can make Westcliff by nightfall if we push hard." He returned to where she sat and offered his hand. "Can you ride?" Helena let him help her to her feet. Standing this close, she caught the scent of leather and sage and something distinctly masculine. Despite everything that had just happened, or perhaps because of it, she found herself acutely aware of his physical presence. There was something solid and reassuring about him, a sense that he was someone who could be relied upon. "I can ride," she said. They moved quickly after that. Yates checked the man he had shot, found him alive but unable to continue, and took his gun before leaving him with his canteen. Then he helped Helena mount his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes, before swinging up behind her. She stiffened at first, uncomfortable with the intimacy of sharing a saddle, but as they started down the slope at a careful trot, she found herself relaxing against his chest. His arm circled her waist to keep her steady, and she could feel the solid strength of him behind her. They rode in silence for the first hour, keeping to rough terrain that would make them harder to track. The land rolled away in waves of gold and green, punctuated by stands of pine and the occasional rocky outcrop. Hawks wheeled overhead, and once they startled a small herd of pronghorn that bounded away with impossible grace. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Yates kept them moving at a steady pace, stopping only once to water the horse at a small creek. "Tell me about yourself," Helena said during that stop. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood while the horse drank. "You said your name like Brennan should know it." Yates picked up a pebble and tossed it into the creek. "I used to work for the territorial marshal's office. Tracker and sometime deputy. I helped track down the Henderson gang last year after they hit 3 banks and killed 4 people. Made a name for myself, I suppose, though I never sought it. Used to work. I resigned 3 months ago." His voice carried a note of finality that suggested he would not elaborate. Helena decided not to push, though her curiosity was piqued. Instead, she asked, "What were you doing out here today? It seems like Providence that you came along when you did." A slight smile touched his lips. I was heading to Westcliff myself. I have a job offer to scout for a rancher setting up an operation south of there. Saw the dust from your pursuit and decided to investigate. He looked at her then, and his expression softened. I am glad I did. Something in his tone made Helena's pulse quicken. She looked away, suddenly flustered. She was not accustomed to the way his attention affected her. In the mining camp, men had looked at her with hunger or calculation, but Yates looked at her like she was someone worth saving, worth protecting. It was a novel and unsettling experience. We should keep moving, she said, standing abruptly. If Yates noticed her discomfort, he was gentleman enough not to comment. They mounted up again and continued south, the afternoon sun slanting lower across the landscape. As the hours passed, Helena found herself talking more, answering Yates's gentle questions about her life. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother's death and her stepmother's coldness. She told him about the journey west and her hopes for independence. He listened attentively, occasionally asking a question but mostly just letting her talk. In turn, he shared fragments of his own story. He had grown up on a ranch in Texas, learned to ride and shoot before he could write his name. His parents had died of fever when he was 17, and he had spent the next 5 years drifting, working cattle drives and odd jobs before finding his way to law enforcement. He spoke matter-of-factly without self-pity, but Helena heard the loneliness beneath his words. He was like her in some ways, she realized, someone searching for a place to belong. "Why did you leave the marshal's office?" she asked finally, unable to suppress her curiosity. Yates was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "We were chasing a gang of rustlers near the border. I had a partner, a man named James Corbett. Good man, better marshal than I ever was. We caught up to the gang at an abandoned ranch house. James wanted to wait for backup, but I thought we could handle it. I pushed, and he agreed." His voice grew tight. "They were waiting for us. Ambush. James took 3 bullets before I could get him out. He died in my arms on the ride back to town." "That was not your fault," Helena said softly. "I was arrogant, thought I was faster and smarter than I was. James paid the price for my pride." He paused. "I turned in my badge the day after his funeral, decided I was done risking other people's lives." Helena twisted in the saddle to look at him. "But you risked your life for me today. That is different. The only life I risked was my own." His eyes met hers, and she saw pain there, but also something else. Something warm and searching. And some risks are worth taking. She did not know what to say to that, so she faced forward again, her heart beating faster. They rode on through the lengthening shadows, and as the sun touched the western horizon, the buildings of Westcliff appeared in the distance. The town was larger than the mining camp Helena had fled, with proper streets and brick buildings mixed among the clapboard structures. A church steeple rose at one end of the main street, and she could see the glow of lamps being lit in windows as dusk settled over the valley. Yates guided them to a modest hotel near the center of town and helped her dismount before tying his horse to the hitching rail. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared inside. He returned a few minutes later with a key. "Got you a room. You will be safe here tonight." "What about you?" "I will be nearby. First thing tomorrow, we will find Deputy Marshal Carson and get your statement recorded. With any luck, he can wire the territorial marshal and we can start building a case against Dalton." Helena nodded, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline and fear of the day were catching up with her, and she swayed on her feet. Yates caught her again, his hands gentle on her arms. "Come on," he said. "Let me get you upstairs." He carried her saddlebag and escorted her to a small but clean room on the second floor. There was a bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window overlooking the street. It seemed like luxury after 3 days of running. "Lock the door behind me," Yates said from the doorway. "I will be in the room at the end of the hall. If you need anything, knock 3 times. "Yates." She stopped him before he could leave. "Thank you for everything." He touched the brim of his hat, that slight smile returning. "Get some rest, Miss Vance. Tomorrow we start fighting back." After he left, Helena locked the door and collapsed onto the bed. She meant to wash up and change clothes, but sleep claimed her within minutes, dragging her down into darkness. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone knocking softly on her door. She sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory flooded back. The pursuit. Yates Sullivan. Westcliff. "Miss Vance, it is Yates." She hurried to unlock the door. He stood in the hallway holding a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I thought you might need some fresh clothes," he said, handing her the package. "The general store was just opening. I guessed at the sizes, so I hope they fit." Helena unwrapped the bundle to find a simple but serviceable dress in dark blue cotton, along with undergarments, stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots. She looked up at him, touched by the thoughtfulness. "How much do I owe you? Consider it a loan against your future prosperity," he said. "Get dressed and meet me downstairs. We will get some breakfast, then find Carson." 20 minutes later, Helena descended to the hotel dining room wearing the new dress. It fit surprisingly well, and she felt more like herself than she had in days. Yates was waiting at a corner table, and his expression when he saw her made her cheeks warm. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. Over breakfast of eggs, bacon, and coffee, Yates explained his plan. Deputy Marshal Carson was a solid lawman who had been trying to build cases against the lawless element that had taken root in the smaller mining camps. Helena's eyewitness testimony to a murder, combined with what Carson already knew about Dalton, might be enough to secure warrants and federal intervention. "The key is getting your statement recorded before Dalton can get to you again," Yates said. "Once it is on record and wired to the territorial marshal, killing you becomes pointless. The evidence exists regardless." "Will that really stop him?" "It should. Men like Dalton are calculating. He will not risk everything just for revenge if it serves no purpose." Helena wanted to believe him, but she had seen the coldness in Dalton's eyes. She was not sure men like that operated on rational calculation alone. Still, what choice did she have but to trust Yates's judgment? They finished breakfast and walked 2 blocks to a sturdy brick building that housed the deputy marshal's office. Inside, they found a lean man in his 40s with steel gray hair and shrewd eyes sitting behind a desk, covered in paperwork. He looked up as they entered, and his face broke into a smile when he saw Yates. "Sullivan, I heard you were dead." "Not yet, Carson." Yates shook the deputy marshal's hand. "I need your help with something important." Over the next hour, Helena told her story while Carson listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. He took detailed notes, and when she finished, he sat back with a grim expression. "I have been trying to get something solid on Dalton for 18 months, he said. "But everyone who might testify ends up changing their mind or disappearing. If you are willing to put your name to this statement, Miss Vance, I can wire the territorial marshal today and request a warrant for Dalton's arrest." "I am willing," Helena said without hesitation. Carson nodded approvingly. "You have courage, miss. Now there is still risk here. It will take a few days for the warrant to be issued and for marshals to reach that camp. During that time, Dalton may make another attempt. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay?" "She stays with me," Yates said before Helena could respond. "I will keep her safe." Carson looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his face. "I am sure you will, Sullivan. All right, Let me get this statement written up formally for your signature, then I will send the wire." 2 hours later, Helena had signed her statement, and Carson had sent detailed telegrams to the Territorial Marshal's office in Denver. As they left the Deputy Marshal's office, Helena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had done what she could. Now she just had to survive long enough for justice to catch up with Frank Dalton. "What now?" she asked Yates. "Now I make sure you stay alive," he said, "and we wait." The waiting proved harder than the running. Yates rented a room at a boarding house on the edge of town, a place owned by a formidable widow named Mrs. Patterson, who agreed to rent Helena a room as well. The boarding house was respectable and comfortable, with good food and clean linens, but Helena felt like a caged animal after days of running. She was used to working, keeping her hands busy, and the forced idleness made her anxious. Yates seemed to sense her restlessness. On the second day, he suggested they take a walk to the edge of town where there was a creek lined with willows. It was a beautiful spot, peaceful and green, and Helena found herself relaxing as they sat on the grassy bank watching the water flow past. "Tell me something," she said. "Why are you really doing this? And do not say it is just about justice. You gave up your badge, remember?" Yates picked a blade of grass and twirled it between his fingers. "Maybe I am trying to prove something to myself." "What?" "That I can protect someone without getting them killed." He looked at her then, his expression vulnerable. "When James died, I swore I would never put someone at risk again because of my choices. But then I saw you up on that ridge, surrounded and alone, and I could not just ride away. So maybe I am testing whether I have learned anything." Helena reached out and touched his hand. "You saved my life, Yates. Whatever happened before, you got it right this time." His fingers closed around hers, and for a long moment they just sat there, hands clasped, watching the creek flow by. Helena was intensely aware of the warmth of his skin, the calluses that spoke of hard work, the gentle strength of his grip. Something was building between them, something that went beyond gratitude or shared danger. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, in the way her heart sped up whenever he entered a room. "Helena," he said softly, and her name in his voice sounded like a prayer. "I know this is not the right time, and God knows I have no business saying this when you are depending on me for protection, but I need you to know something." "What?" "From the moment I saw you on that ridge, something changed for me. I do not just want to keep you safe because it is the right thing to do. I want to keep you safe because the thought of anything happening to you tears me apart. I know we have only known each other 3 days, but I feel like I have been waiting my whole life to meet you." Helena's breath caught. She had been trying not to examine her own feelings too closely, telling herself that what she felt was just gratitude and relief. But hearing him voice the same impossible connection she had been feeling made it impossible to deny any longer. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I keep telling myself it is too fast, that I am just emotional because you saved me, but it is more than that. When you look at me, I feel like you see who I really am, like I matter. You do matter." Yates raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You matter more than you could possibly know." They sat there in the dappled sunlight, hands clasped, and Helena felt something settle in her chest that had been restless and seeking for as long as she could remember. This was what home felt like, she realized. Not a place, but a person. Someone who saw you and stayed. The spell was broken by the sound of someone calling Yates's name. They looked up to see a boy of about 12 running toward them along the creek bank, waving urgently. It was Tommy, one of Mrs. Patterson's grandchildren who helped around the boarding house. "Mr. Sullivan," the boy panted as he reached them. "Deputy Marshal Carson sent me to find you, says you need to come quick." They hurried back to town, Tommy running ahead. Helena's earlier peace evaporated, replaced by tight anxiety. Had something gone wrong? Had Dalton somehow learned where she was? They found Carson in his office with two other men, both wearing marshal's badges. The deputy marshal looked grave as they entered. "Sullivan, Miss Vance. These gentlemen are U.S. Marshals Brenner and Davis from Denver. They arrived this morning with news." The older of the two marshals, a weathered man with a thick mustache, stepped forward. "Miss Vance, we received Deputy Carson's wire and moved quickly to arrest Frank Dalton on murder charges. However, when we arrived at the mining camp this morning, we found Dalton and most of his men gone. They cleared out sometime during the night." Helena felt cold dread wash through her. "He knows I gave a statement." "Someone must have tipped him off," Marshal Brenner said. "We found evidence that confirms your account of the murder. The prospector's body was discovered where you said it would be, and several people came forward once they knew Dalton was gone. You were right about everything, Miss Vance. We have warrants for Dalton and 4 of his men, including Cole Brennan." "But they got away," Helena said flatly. "For now. But we have their descriptions out to every law enforcement office in Colorado and the surrounding territories. Sooner or later they will surface." Marshal Brenner paused. "However, you should be aware that Dalton left behind a message. He said to tell you that he does not forgive witnesses and he does not forget." Yates moved closer to Helena, his presence solid and reassuring. "She will be protected." "I am sure she will, Sullivan," Carson said, "but you need to be realistic about what you are taking on. Dalton is not going to let this go." "Then I will make sure I am ready for him when he comes," Yates said quietly. There was steel in his voice that made even the marshals pause. After the meeting, Yates and Helena walked back toward the boarding house in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but Helena barely noticed. She felt numb, hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I have brought nothing but trouble into your life." Yates stopped walking and turned to face her. They were on a quiet side street, and in the fading light his eyes looked almost silver. "Listen to me," he said, taking both her hands in his. "You did not bring trouble. You survived. You stood up against corruption and violence, and you refused to be silenced. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done. I am proud to stand with you, Helena Vance. Proud and honored." Tears stung her eyes. "What if Dalton comes for me again? I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me. Then we will face him together." He pulled her closer and she went willingly, resting her forehead against his chest. "I am not going anywhere, Helena. Not now, not ever if you will have me." She looked up at him, searching his face. "We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you are brave and stubborn and kind. I know you laugh when you are nervous and you bite your lower lip when you are thinking hard about something. I know your eyes are the color of honey in the sunlight, and when you smile it feels like the whole world gets brighter." He cupped her face gently in his hands. "I know I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. If that is not enough to build on, I do not know what is." Helena felt her walls crumbling. All the careful defenses she had built over years of disappointment and hurt. This man had risked everything for her, not once but repeatedly. He looked at her like she hung the moon, and when she was with him, she felt like maybe she could be the person he saw when he looked at her. "I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but I am." His smile was like sunrise. "Then we are terrified together because I am already in love with you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Helena melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for that perfect moment nothing else mattered. Not Dalton, not danger, not the uncertain future. There was only this man and this feeling and the rightness of being exactly where she was supposed to be, When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Helena laughed breathlessly. "You are crazy." "Probably, but marry me anyway. As soon as this is over and Dalton is in custody, marry me. I want to build a life with you, Helena. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a ranch and raise children and grow old watching sunsets. I want everything, and I want it with you." Helena knew it was too fast, too crazy, too impossible. But she also knew that some things in life were worth the risk, some things were worth believing in. And this man, with his storm-colored eyes and his fierce protectiveness and his tender heart, was worth everything. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They stood there on that quiet street, holding each other as darkness fell, and made promises to whatever future they could build together. The next weeks were strange ones, suspended between fear and joy. Yates stayed close, teaching Helena to shoot properly with a borrowed revolver, and drilling her on what to do if trouble came. But he also courted her with old-fashioned devotion, bringing her wildflowers from the meadows outside town and taking her on evening walks along the creek. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Mrs. Patterson noticed, of course. The boarding house owner was too shrewd to miss the way Yates and Helena looked at each other. One evening she cornered Helena in the kitchen while Helena was helping with the dishes. "That young man is serious about you," Mrs. Patterson observed, handing Helena a plate to dry. "I know," Helena said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "You are serious about him too, I see." "Yes, madam." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "Good. A woman needs a man who will stand between her and the wolves. Yates Sullivan is that kind of man. He reminds me of my late husband, actually. Quiet strength, that kind. He asked me to marry him," Helena confessed. "And you said yes, I hope." "I did." "Then we should start planning. A wedding is not something to rush into unprepared, even if the engagement is short." Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. "I happen to know the minister's wife quite well. I am sure we can arrange something lovely once that business with the outlaw is settled." Helena felt warmth spread through her chest. This was what community felt like, she realized. People caring about your happiness, helping you build a future. She had been alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like to be part of something larger than herself. 3 weeks after Helena's statement was recorded, Deputy Marshal Carson received a telegram that changed everything. Frank Dalton and 2 of his men had been spotted in a settlement called Reseda, 20 miles west of Westcliff. A posse was being formed to bring them in, and Carson asked Yates if he would join as a tracker. Yates refused at first. "I am not leaving Helena unprotected." "The marshals think this is our best chance to end this," Carson argued. "And Miss Vance will be safe here. I will personally ensure she has protection while you are gone." Helena listened to them debate in Carson's office, understanding the dilemma. As long as Dalton was free, she would never be truly safe. But the thought of Yates riding into danger made her heart clench with terror. Finally, she spoke up. "You should go." Both men looked at her in surprise. "Helena," Yates began, but she cut him off. "You are the best tracker they have. You know it and they know it. If there is a chance to end this, we have to take it." She walked to where he stood and took his hands. "I trust Deputy Carson to keep me safe, and I trust you to come back to me." Yates searched her face for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. "I will come back," he promised against her hair. "I swear to you I will come back." He left with the posse at dawn the next morning. Helena stood on the boarding house porch and watched him ride away, her heart in her throat. Mrs. Patterson came to stand beside her, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He will be all right, dear. That young man has too much to live for to be careless." Helena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She spent the day trying to keep busy, helping Mrs. Patterson with chores and mending, but her mind was 20 miles west, imagining every possible danger. Deputy Carson stopped by in the afternoon to check on her, assuring her that Yates was in good hands and the posse was well armed and prepared. Night fell with no word. Helena lay awake in her room, listening to every sound, jumping at shadows. She prayed, something she had not done in years, bargaining with God in the darkness. Let him be safe. Let him come back to me. I will do anything, be anything, just let him come back. Morning came gray and uncertain. Helena dressed and went downstairs to help with breakfast, needing something to do with her hands. She was rolling out biscuit dough when Mrs. Patterson called from the front parlor. "Helena, they are coming back." Helena dropped the rolling pin and ran. From the front window she could see riders approaching down the main street. She counted them frantically, trying to identify individuals, and then she saw him. Yates, sitting tall in the saddle, looking tired but whole. Relief so intense it made her dizzy washed through her. She ran out the front door and down the steps, propriety forgotten. Yates saw her coming and dismounted in one fluid motion, catching her as she threw herself into his arms. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and she could feel him trembling. "I am all right," he murmured. "I am all right. I promised I would come back. Did you get him?" she asked against his chest. "Dalton is dead. Tried to shoot his way out when we cornered him. The other two are in custody and headed for Denver to stand trial." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "It is over, Helena. You are safe. He can never hurt you again." Helena started to cry then, great gulping sobs of relief and release. All the fear and tension of the past month poured out of her, and Yates just held her, letting her cry it out. Around them, the other members of the posse were dismounting and dispersing, giving them privacy. Finally, when Helena had cried herself out, Yates wiped her tears gently with his thumbs. "So," he said, that slight smile playing around his lips, "about that wedding. Think the minister might have an opening this Sunday." Helena laughed through her tears. "I think that can be arranged." They married on a brilliant Sunday afternoon in mid-September, with Deputy Marshal Carson standing as Yates's best man and Mrs. Patterson serving as matron of honor. Half the town turned out, curious to see the young couple whose dramatic courtship had been the talk of Westcliff for weeks. Helena wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson and several other women had spent the week sewing, and she carried wildflowers that Yates had picked that morning from the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. As they stood before the minister in the small church, Helena looked at the man beside her and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had gone from being hunted and alone to being cherished and protected. She had found not just safety but love, the deep and lasting kind that came from truly being seen and valued. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that it brought tears to her eyes again. But these were happy tears, tears of joy and gratitude and hope for all the days ahead. The reception was held in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house dining room, with food contributed by half the women in town. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Helena felt lighter than she had in years. She danced with her new husband, with Deputy Carson, with several of the local ranchers who had become friends over the past weeks. But she kept returning to Yates, drawn back to him like a magnet. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Yates leaned close and whispered in her ear, "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Sullivan?" The name sent a thrill through her. More than ready. They had rented a small house on the edge of town, just a cabin really, but it was theirs. Yates carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, and Helena laughed with pure delight. They had built a fire earlier in the day, so the single room was warm and welcoming. There was a bed in one corner, a cookstove against the far wall, a table with 2 chairs and not much else. But it felt like a palace to Helena. That night they became husband and wife in every sense, learning each other with tenderness and patience. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Helena felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking that 2 months ago I was running for my life, and now I am here with you. It feels like a dream. A good dream, I hope. The best dream." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "What happens now?" "You mentioned taking that scouting job. Actually, I have been thinking about that." Yates tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The rancher who offered me the job has a piece of land for sale, about 200 acres with good water and grazing. I have some money saved, and with what we could make from your sewing if you wanted to keep working, we might be able to buy it, build our own place." "Our own ranch?" Helena's eyes widened. "Could we really? It would be hard work. Years of hard work, probably. But we would be building something that belongs to us, something we could pass on to our children someday." He searched her face. "What do you think?" Helena thought about the life he was describing. A home of their own, land that belonged to them, children running through the grass. It was everything she had dreamed of when she first headed west, but it was so much better because she would be building it with this man who loved her. "I think," she said slowly, "that it sounds perfect." Yates's smile could have lit the whole night sky. He pulled her down for a kiss that was full of promise and passion, and Helena let herself sink into it, into him, into this new life they were creating together. The next year was hard but happy. They bought the land and spent months building a small ranch house with help from neighbors. Yates worked as a scout for the rancher while Helena took in sewing from town, and together they saved every penny they could. They bought cattle in the spring, just a small herd to start, and Yates built fences and corrals while Helena planted a garden and learned to manage a household. It was exhausting work, but they did it together, side by side, and Helena had never been happier. She loved the life they were building, loved watching their dream take shape. But most of all, she loved the man she had married, who worked himself to exhaustion every day and still found energy to hold her at night, to make her laugh, to remind her how much she was loved. In the fall of their first year together, Helena realized she was pregnant. She told Yates over supper one evening, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, and finally pure joy. He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Helena laughed with him, her earlier nervousness melting away. "Are you happy?" "Happy." He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Helena, I am beyond happy. I am blessed. You and this child are the greatest gifts I could ever receive." Their son was born the following May, on a warm spring morning filled with birdsong. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Patterson and the doctor from town, but when Helena finally held her baby in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. The infant had Yates's storm-gray eyes and a surprising amount of dark hair, and he was perfect. "What should we name him?" Helena asked, watching as Yates held his son for the first time with a mixture of terror and awe on his face. "What about Matthew?" Yates suggested. "It means gift of God, and that is exactly what he is." So Matthew Sullivan joined their little family, and their lives changed in all the wonderful and exhausting ways that babies bring. Yates proved to be a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy. Helena would often wake to find her husband sitting by the window in the moonlight, holding their sleeping son and just watching him with wonder on his face. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. By the time Matthew was 2, they had increased their herd and built a proper barn. Yates's reputation as a straight dealer and honest rancher spread, and they were invited to join the local cattlemen's association. Helena's sewing business grew as well, and she was training 2 young women from town in the craft. They were invited to Sunday dinners at neighbors' homes and hosted gatherings at their own ranch. They had become part of the community, respected and liked. It was everything Helena had dreamed of when she first headed west: independence, prosperity, belonging. But the best moments were the quiet ones, just the 3 of them. Evenings when they would sit on the porch after Matthew was in bed, watching the sun set over the mountains while Yates held Helena's hand. Mornings when she would wake to find him watching her with love in his eyes. The 1,000 small moments of tenderness and partnership that made up a life together. 3 years after Matthew's birth, Helena gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, with golden hair and Helena's honey-colored eyes. 2 years after that came another boy, James, named for Yates's late partner. Each child was welcomed with joy and celebration, and their home rang with laughter and love. As the years passed, the ranch grew into a substantial operation. They built a larger house with room for their growing family and hired ranch hands to help with the work. Yates developed a reputation for raising quality cattle, and they were able to expand their land holdings. Helena became known throughout the territory for the fineness of her needlework, and women would travel from miles around to commission special pieces. But through all the success and growth, the core of their lives remained the same: each other and their family. Yates still looked at Helena like she hung the moon, even after 15 years of marriage. Helena still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. They still talked for hours on the porch in the evenings, sharing dreams and memories and the comfortable silence of 2 people who knew each other completely. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Helena back to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. It was early autumn, and the aspen trees were turning gold on the mountainsides. They spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree and lay side by side, looking up at the brilliant blue sky. "You ever think about that day when I found you on the ridge?" Yates asked. "Sometimes. It feels like another life." Helena turned her head to look at him. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had not come along, where I would be now. I prefer not to think about that." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I thank God every day that I decided to investigate that dust cloud. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved my life," Helena said softly. "No." Yates rolled onto his side to face her, his eyes serious. "You saved mine." "I was drifting, Helena, lost and guilty and purposeless. You gave me a reason to be better, to try again. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. If anyone did the saving, it was you." Helena felt tears sting her eyes. After 20 years, he could still move her with words. "I love you, Yates Sullivan, more now than even on the day we married. And I love you, Helena Sullivan, more than words can say." They kissed there in the meadow under the golden aspens, and it felt like coming home. It always had with him from that very first day. He was her home, her safe place, her greatest adventure. Years continued to pass, gentle and full. Matthew grew into a man much like his father, quiet, strong, honorable. He took over more of the ranch operations as Yates's hair turned silver and his steps grew slower. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who reminded Helena of Yates in his youth. James showed a talent for horses and built a reputation as a trainer. Helena and Yates became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Their small ranch house that had grown into a homestead filled to bursting with family. Looking around at all the love they had created, Helena marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From hunted and alone on a Colorado ridge to matriarch of a thriving family. From seamstress fleeing for her life to respected businesswoman and rancher's wife. All because a young cowboy with storm-colored eyes had seen a woman in trouble and decided she was worth saving. She found Yates on the porch that evening after the party, sitting in his favorite rocking chair and watching the sun set over the mountains he had loved his whole life. She settled into the chair beside him and took his weathered hand in hers. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" His voice was raspier now with age, but still warm, still beloved. "For everything. For saving me. For loving me. For this life we built together." Yates squeezed her hand gently. "The pleasure has been entirely mine, Mrs. Sullivan." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of fear and loss. Helena thought about the terrified girl she had been, trapped on that ridge with nowhere to run. If she could have seen this future then, seen all the love and joy and family waiting for her on the other side of that fear, would she have believed it? Probably not. But that was the thing about life. Sometimes the best things came from the darkest moments. Sometimes salvation arrived on horseback just when you had given up hope. Sometimes a stranger became everything you needed, and love grew in the spaces between danger and safety. She had run with men at every pass, nowhere left to go, no hope of escape. And then Yates Sullivan had created an opening and gotten her free. But he had given her so much more than freedom. He had given her love, family, purpose, home. He had given her everything that mattered, and she had spent every day of their life together grateful for the miracle of him. As they rocked together on that porch, their lives stretching behind them like a well-traveled road and their remaining years ahead like a gentle sunset, Helena knew she would not change a single moment. Even the fear, even the running, even the terror of that ridge had been worth it because they had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect peace. Their story had started with a bullet and a stranger and a desperate need for rescue. But it had become something far greater. A love story for the ages, a partnership that had weathered every storm, a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations. Helena Vance, who had once had nowhere to run, had found in Yates Sullivan not just freedom but everything her heart had ever longed for. And that, she thought as she squeezed her husband's hand and watched the stars emerge over the Colorado wilderness, was the greatest gift of all.